the more that you can reward positive behavior, the more likely it is for that positive behavior to continue to happen in the future. Welcome to the Ryan Rice Show, where we talk about what we learned yesterday that we can apply today so that we can be better tomorrow. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. Over the past 6 months, I have completely revamped my leadership, and I want to take you guys on that journey with me and tell you the story of how I identified that there was a problem. What are some of the things that I did in the in-between? What did I do to change? And what the results and the outcome has been since I did that. I led teams for a really long time. In fact, my entire professional career, I spent over a decade leading large teams. In the most recent role that I was in, we led a team that did over $4 billion in revenue. And this was a team that I led both virtually and in person. So my direct reports were across 3 different states, and there were many of them. And I don't say that to impress upon you, but I think it's important if you're going to listen to a podcast episode about leadership, maybe having some context behind the fact that I was in some leadership roles where, we did some bigger things. Again, not to impress you, more to impress upon you how important leadership is. And even someone who led large teams for over a decade, I had some pretty big faults. And I recognized them, I changed them, and I've seen some very, very good impact. So I think that in and of itself can be a good takeaway. It was for me. But here's what happened with me. So I'm in my 4th year in business, and I'm working with a lot more people than I was when I first got started. And what's different about me leading in my business now and me leading in my prior role in a Fortune 30 company, my leadership now, everyone that I'm leading is in direct correlation with revenue coming in, service to my clients. It's very, very client facing. It's very, very revenue driven. Everyone, because the company is so small compared to the Fortune 30 company that I worked with, the impact of all of our actions touch our clients in a lot different of a way than when I was at my Fortune 30 company. If there were gaps in my leadership, or if there were gaps in anyone, if there was a poor performer, well, we would just fire them, or we would get feedback and they would get better, but it wouldn't have any drastic impact to the company's revenue, right? For those of you who don't know, I worked for Target. There were 1,800 stores at the time when I worked for them. And so my leadership, or the team that I led, if there were some small gaps, it's not like the 1,800 stores, the revenue dropped drastically. In my small business, if there are any gaps with stuff that we need to be executing within the business, that is going to have a drastic impact because we're significantly smaller. And I think this has kind of been a blessing in disguise for me, because maybe some things that weren't as apparent to me through my leadership at Target became exponentially more visible to me in my smaller business. Well, over the past 6 months, because my team has been growing and I'm working with more and more people, there seemed to be just this consistent frustration that I was feeling in my business. And part of it stemmed from the fact that I have insanely high expectations. I expect everything to be done at a level of true excellence. And I think that's good as a business owner. I think how that is communicated and how those expectations are held and how my expectations are, I'll say, enforced is really important, because something that I've always struggled with is when people around me don't have the same expectations, or if I'm more passionate about my expectations than other people, it really drives me a little bit bananas. And I think I spent a lot of time not understanding the gap. And if there was a gap, then I would just get frustrated. And I think my frustration stemmed from the fact that my expectations of others remained the same as my expectations of myself. And I quickly realized that that is not great. But the one thing that I noticed as things would continue to happen and I would get frustrated because this isn't happening correct, or this wasn't perfect, or maybe there was an issue here and I feel like I've communicated this before, but it's not happening. I would end my day and I'd go upstairs and I would talk to my wife and I would just tell her what happened. Hey, here's the situation. Here's what happened. And what's great is my wife personally knows some of the people that are working with me in my business. And so she has the full context on some of the people. Now, some of the people she doesn't, but some of the people she does. I think the great thing about her having context on some of the people who are in my business is that because she knows them and I'm telling a story, she can tell me that I'm full of shit. Because if she doesn't know them and I'm not happy about the way that somebody is executing something because of my super high expectations, then she doesn't know the person, so she may attribute just the fact that maybe that person isn't doing what they're supposed to. Well, what was great about this happening, and this happened over and over and over, right? Stuff would happen, I would go upstairs, and I'm genuinely seeking a solution. Like, I noticed this theme where I would genuinely be getting frustrated that I would have this desired outcome that I think the way things should be happening within my business, they consistently wouldn't be happening that way. I would perceive that as impacting our client experience, or I would perceive that as potentially impacting our incoming revenue. And I knew it was a big deal. And what was great too is sometimes I would be having conversations with some of the people on my team, and I would be upstairs and my wife would overhear them. And so honestly, I give so much credit to my wife because I think she is so naturally gifted at understanding other people. And she's helped me identify a lot of these issues. But as I kept talking to her about these frustrations, and as she would hear me communicating to the people on my team about certain things, what I came to realize is I was very much leading from a place of criticism, and I was not leading from a place of reward. And here is what I mean by that. I would have this vision for how a process should go. So and obviously in this example, the process is we put a home under contract with a seller. There's a lot of in-between stuff that needs to happen in order to get that deal closed. If I'm buying it myself, there are certain things. If I'm wholesaling it, there are certain things. And then ultimately the deal closes. And my desired outcome of that whole experience was that in the end, when it was done, the seller has such an over-the-top, amazing experience that they do nothing but want to tell other people about it. And if that expectation wasn't met, then I would get frustrated. Or if there were things that were happening in the in-between that wouldn't be contributing to that outcome, then I would get frustrated. So I had this grand vision of how I thought things should go. I thought I did a decent job of communicating how I think things should be done in order to accomplish that outcome. But what I was doing is every time that I had this vision in my head of how things should go, and they didn't happen in accordance with that vision, I would go attack it, right? And it came from a good place. It sounds so simple, and it sounds almost like a duh, especially if you've led teams before. But hear me out, because it came from a really good place. If that desired outcome wasn't being met in my mind, then I would go attack the issue, right? So if someone did something, I would go address that something that someone did, because my thought was that if I could address that, that would help make sure that that wouldn't happen again, and I want to identify the root cause of why the person did the thing that they did that didn't ultimately lead to a phenomenal experience for our clients. And what was happening is I was doing that so much. And again, I was doing it over every time I saw something, right? Every time that something happened, I would boom, attack it, boom, attack it, boom, attack it. And I think what was happening is my leadership was just coming across very critical, as opposed to I was not leading from a sense of reward. So everyone knows the Pavlov dog theory, right? If you, and not to compare people that work with me to dogs, but I think this is a good example. The more that you can reward positive behavior, the more likely it is for that positive behavior to continue to happen in the future. If a dog jumps on the couch and I slap the dog, then maybe the dog would get down. And then if that happens over and over again, then the dog is going to understand that they're not allowed on the couch. But what happens is the second that I leave the room, the dog is attributing the fact that they can't be on the couch to me, right? So I leave the room, the dog jumps on the couch, the root cause of the issue is not solved. However, if a dog jumps on the couch and then I get them down and then I reward the dog with a treat, and then I do that over and over again, guess what? When I leave the room, the dog is not associating with getting off the couch to me, but the dog is rewarded for getting off the couch, so they stay off the couch. Real quick, as you guys know, I just recently started this podcast. If you could give it a rating with a quick tap of the thumb, that would mean the world to me. And even more importantly, it could help spread the word to a broader audience, which in turn could help change a life. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the show. And I think that's such a simple understanding and framework for leadership, because the way that I was leading people, I think, and in a way that I identified this, sorry to interrupt my thought there, but the way that I identified this is I noticed that my team would communicate, oh, I want to make sure that we do the right things for Ryan, or, oh, Ryan said this, or, oh, I want to make sure. And I kept trying to verbally explain to them, like, hey, I don't want you leading, I don't want you making decisions based on what I want. I want you making decisions based on our desired outcome of what's best for the client or what's best for this project. And it didn't matter how many times I said that over and over and over again, because of the way that I was leading, which was something went wrong in my mind. Boom, critical, boom, critical, boom, critical, so that it could be corrected, so that the outcome would be good. I was very much slapping the dog so they'd get off the couch. And it was becoming all about me, right? And that was not my intention. And I would get frustrated because, number one, I would have to constantly do these things over and over again. But two, like, I would get uncomfortable because I sensed this tension. Because I'm constantly criticizing, critical, there would be this tension between me and my team. And like, I didn't like that. I couldn't pinpoint like what is going on. But the more conversations I have with my wife, the more she made me aware that, like, look, dude, the way that you're communicating is actually the problem. And I didn't want to believe her at first. But I started to understand and hear that maybe she had a point. So there were a couple things that I did in the meantime. I went and I was like, okay, you know what? I have led large teams for over a decade, and I've read a ton of leadership books. I feel like every leadership book that exists out there, I've read. But I was like, I am going to dive hard into this topic and study and figure this the F out. So I went and I read like 6 of the top leadership books that I have. I did some other things to study leadership. I made a bunch of notes. I pulled all those notes, and I'll make another podcast episode about this to identify kind of the common threads that I uncovered in leadership in all of the different books that I read. But consistently, in every leadership book, one of the biggest things that I noticed was how important it was to understand the concept that leading teams is a responsibility, and you're truly in service of the people that you're leading. And it's not about anything else. And I knew that, and I've read that before, but as I thought about that more, I realized that maybe I wasn't leading from that frame. And also one of the biggest things was, as a leader, you have to lead and motivate by reward, not motivate by punishment. And I think what was happening is me constantly exposing, in my mind, the thing that was doing wrong was very much leading from a sense of punishment. And it just, number one, it doesn't help people understand where you want to go, because ultimately they attribute the punishment to you, not what was my intention, which was the desired outcome that I was going for. And I made a decision, and I just said, okay, I am not going to lead like that anymore. I'm going to change. And what was interesting about this shift is that there was a period of like 2 or 3 weeks where I was changing this, where there were a lot of times where I felt like I had to hold my tongue. But I made a very concerted effort, and I was not doing this before, that every time something was happening in a way that I thought it was great, I would boom, recognize, boom, reward, boom, encourage. And I was leading a lot more from that frame. And over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, this probably took a good 3 weeks of me consistently doing this. And there was an in-between of discomfort because it felt like things should be happening quicker. And I would let things go a little bit. But what I noticed is after that 2 to 3 week period, stuff not only started happening in the way that I expected, but like some of the people on my team started doing them better than I even could. And I thought that was kind of an interesting realization. And I felt like an arrogant asshole, even though like I very much try not to espouse any sense of arrogance ever. But I think because I had this super crazy high expectation of how I thought things should be, it was coming across in a different way. But as soon as I started leading off reward, and criticism was like down to zero, and people started doing things even in a way that like I didn't even think about, I was like, well, I guess this is a perfect example of why stuff like this is written in every leadership book, and so on and so forth. And I even think back to my time at Target. I got really good results at Target. I mean, I guess the people around me thought that I did a decent job. I got promoted a bunch of times, and I was leading a very large team when I left. But I do feel like when I was at Target, there was every role that I went through became less operationally focused and more leadership focused. In other words, I think a lot of the results that I got out of brute force because I just worked my ass off. And the further removed I got from the brute force that I was able to put in, the more a magnifying glass was put on my leadership and my ability to get that brute force out of others versus my own ability to put in brute force. And I think now I realize, looking back, that there were some things like, had I adopted this while I was at Target, I think my leadership could have been even more effective. So I wanted to share this with you because now I'm many months into doing this, and I've noticed this drastic shift with the people that I'm leading in my business. One, they just seem more joyous. Imagine that. I'm not criticizing them every 5 seconds. 2, they seem to be getting results that they weren't getting from my perspective before. And I think that's because they felt they were on such a short leash because I would always correct them. And because I would always correct them, I think they would always have in the back of their head like, oh, what's Ryan going to think? And I don't know that has successfully been removed, But what I do know is leading from a sense of reward and not criticism has enabled them to feel empowered to make decisions and to take action that they feel good about. And they are just crushing it. I mean, they're taking care of our clients in an incredible way. And I'm super proud of them. And I think they're doing things even better than I could in some of the roles that they're serving in. So I know this sounds super basic, and for those of you that have led teams, it's, and if you're really good with people, you're probably like, well, duh, like, yeah, don't criticize people and they're not going to hate what they do. But for me, I think because I was coming from a frame of like, there was no choice but to deliver the highest expectation that possibly exists. And if that choice was not met, or if that expectation was not met, then there is a problem and we need to go solve that problem immediately. Again, it was coming from that space. It wasn't like I knew that you should treat people well, and I knew that people like recognition. And so it wasn't that I found joy out of telling people every time they did something wrong. It was purely coming from a place of like, hey, I had this expectation. So it's like the vision. I saw the vision so clearly that the path along the way, I was just kind of bulldozing. So really good learning lesson for me. I hope you guys got something out of that, because it was a very simple shift in the way that I lead that is very much impacting the actual outcomes and the actual results that are within my business. And I think I'll close with a thought that a frame that has really helped me in my business. I think I always thought in business that if there was a problem, and this could be if someone is helping to underwrite a deal and they make a mistake, or if we have a deal and the client isn't being served in the way that we would want, I would see that as a big problem. And oh my gosh, we need to go solve that problem. And like, we really got to figure this out. And what is the issue? We should be perfect. And I think what I've realized that if you have a problem in your business is not a problem. It is a business. And just that frame alone kind of gives me some grace not to have to deliver this sense of perfection. I have a renowned sense of grace for the way that things happen in the business, because now I expect that there are going to be problems in the business. And that if there are problems in the business, it doesn't mean there's this big issue. It means that it is a business. And those problems are a dichotomy to be managed rather than a problem to be solved. And it's something that if I want to run this business forever, which is the outcome, right? That is what I'm after, to stay in business, then my problems in my business are never going to go away. Why? Because it's a freaking business. So that frame alone has helped me just approach things a little bit different. And if things aren't being done in the way that I expect, it's not this big issue that needs to go be solved immediately. It's indicative that I have a business and that there are people that run that business. And how can we simply devise the processes, have the right people in place, communicate and motivate them in the right way in order to achieve the outcome, rather than, hey, there's something that's getting in the way of the outcome and let's go attack it, and it's not perfect and that's unacceptable and let's go fix it. So anyways, I hope you guys got some value out of that. Me being a little bit vulnerable from a leadership perspective here, but I wanted to share that because it was good insight for me. And if you're in a position where you're leading some teams, whether you're an employee or a business owner, maybe that little thought can help you. So appreciate you guys listening. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.